Hi guys, if you're taking my course in early U.S. history, you're going to need to engage with something called learning objectives on Blackboard. These are posted for each unit and they are just a series of questions about the material that I think you should be able to answer after you read your textbook and you listen to me give you little mini lectures about this topic and that topic. To get specific, we can open up the learning objectives for Unit 1 and look at Chapter 1, which is what we're reading this very first week of school. We'll look at number 2. There's a little series of questions that are kind of put together in a group because they are actually related. Number 1, what role did the weather play in shaping the environment and lifestyles of Native Americans? What was the agricultural revolution? How many Native Americans do scholars estimate lived north of the Rio Grande in 1492? If you've ever seen an episode of Naked and Afraid, you will kind of have some concept in your mind already about how your environment impacts your resources. So what is that? This is a silly reality TV show that's on the Discovery Channel or something. I sometimes watch it when I want something mindless. But what they do is they drop these survivalists, naked and afraid, into different places, and they say, okay guys, you go find your food, you go make your little shelter, you do you, and see how well it all turns out for you. Obviously, if you're in a desert environment, you're going to need different things and encounter different resources than if you are in a more wintry environment. It looks different in the desert than it does in the mountains. So you have to adjust your strategies. Early settlers in the Americas were no different. If animals went south, hunters chased the animals because animals are delicious. Sorry, vegans. And they provide lots of protein and you survive. Fortunately for the future vegans of the world, we had something called the agricultural revolution. When I say we, I mean humanity. All of a sudden, instead of hunting and gathering only, people learned how to cultivate the land. So we had a shift to farming. And this is really important because once human beings figure this out, they can be more settled and they can have more complex societies grow up. Now I want you to understand the agricultural revolution didn't just happen for every group of people at the exact same time. This is something that occurs via various groups in different places as they're dispersed over millions of acres of land. Some groups of people lived where it was so cold that farming wasn't really an option. Or you lived in places like the Eastern Woodland tribes where you farmed together and formed little villages essentially during the summer months, spring and summer. But then as you started to get past a certain season, you would disperse into smaller family units and you would hunt and live off the land. Let's get to that last question about how many people lived north of the Rio Grande in 1492 when Europeans sailed the ocean blue. That number is not a number that we know for certain. First, let me say that. We don't have a census that we can go back to, and no one was sitting there counting people, going 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to depend on various disciplines to even make a good guess. You can find experts who give higher estimates, and you can find experts who give lower estimates. But your textbook has settled on a consensus number of around 4 million people living above the Rio Grande in 1492. To put that into perspective, Austin, Texas, the metro area, has a little more than 2 million people. So we can just double Austin, Texas, and you've got all the Native Americans who live north of the Rio Grande. Well, that's a lot of people, to be sure. Is it as many as you thought? It doesn't seem like as many as I would think. And that's probably because there were many more millions of Native Americans who lived south of the Rio Grande that we often talk about and think about. People like the Aztecs and the Mayans and a whole bunch of the Incas, a whole bunch of other peoples that we study. While your textbook doesn't tell you how many people lived in this hemisphere in 1492, I know that it was probably around 54 to 60 million souls. So a quick question would be, why did so many people go south of the Rio Grande? Well, could it have something to do with the weather? Perhaps they were chasing the sun? If you're really interested in how the environment helps shape cultures and change societies through millennia, and actually helps even to explain the dominance of one people's over another people's, you might be interested in a classic from the 1990s called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jarrett Diamond. There are arguments within this book that are really broad and they can be argued with for sure, but these ideas are still influential and insightful. For example, Diamond makes a really big deal about a weapon of mass destruction that the Spaniards brought over with them that they neither controlled or really understood, and that was smallpox. The Native Americans had long ago lost their immunity to this in any way, shape, or form, and it just sliced through their populations, killing as many as 90% of the tribes, the people in the tribes that contracted this horrible, horrible disease. This epidemiological event, the destruction of various tribes via smallpox, is an important one for you to note and is actually related to another learning objective, so just a heads up. Hopefully you understand that you don't have to write down the answers to all these questions. You can just engage with them, try and think to yourself, why is this lady asking me these things? I would tell you that environment still impacts culture and societies. So it's something that you can kind of keep in your mind as you're trying to make sense of the world around you. Do take some notes because you can use those when you take your timed exam. The things that you might not be able to keep in your mind, like that 4 million number. All right, I hope that helps. Bye.